Randy Kessler is here with what this discovery means. This is pretty interesting, Randy. Glad to have you here.
Thanks. Glad to be here. You know, nobody likes going to lawyers, right? And it's shocking that she didn't.
This is Randy Kessler. There are a lot of interviews that talk about, you as far as people asking you for your opinion,
right? But
not too many on who you are.
So it depends on who's asking, I guess, and what the context is. But who is Randy Kessler? I don't know. He's a guy. He's an insecure kid grew up in New Orleans, son of a great set of parents, a dad who worked his behind off, traveling across the country, salesman, and a mom who loved us, me and my brother, and went far away from New Orleans to see the world, and traveled across the world, and traveled to Boston for college, and came back to Atlanta for law school at Emory, and found my home and got in with a good group when I was in law school, worked for them for a couple of years, went to another person to learn a little bit more about family law, which is what I sort of wanted to do. Started my own practice at age 29, took everything that came in the door, and within a few years realized I love family law, I love helping people going through family law crises, and kept hiring people to make sure I was giving good advice and made sure I surrounded myself with smart people.
What was the inspiration for law school?
So I'll never forget, my grandfather was a cab driver. He worked the night shift at the Miami airport. And when I was 3 years old, he said, "You're going to grow up to be a lawyer." Not a shyster, but a lawyer. And I didn't know what that word meant back then, but I learned. I don't know if that's why I became a lawyer, but it was the first time I'd heard the term and thought about it. I knew I liked being around people. I knew I liked helping people, and that sounds very generic. And everyone says, "Yeah, I want to help people. That's why I'm in marketing," or that's what. But I loved law school. I went to law school. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after college. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. Went to law school, found a clerkship, enjoyed it. Enjoyed meeting people. Enjoyed them feeling like I had something to offer them. When they said, "Can you give me your opinion?" Like, I'm just a kid. What do you mean? Do you need my opinion? So. That's really why we have 18 lawyers now, because I really still, 62 years old, I still feel insecure when somebody says, "Is this right for me?" And I think it is after my years of experience, and I think this is what will work in your case or your family or your situation, but who knows? So the more smart people I can have around me, the better I feel about the advice I give. But that's sort of, if there was a mission statement, we have a mission statement on our website, but it's sort of a, the idea is to help people and feel good about it and sleep good at night and know that, we did things for the right reason, told people what was good for them, in our opinion, and gave them options. So,
you mentioned sleep at night. Are there any times you have cases or client situations where it's hard to sleep at night?
All the time. There are cases, and it's not, hopefully I can, the things that keep me up at night are hopefully not things I've done, right? And very rarely do I find something that I think, God, I really messed that up. And if I do what I can. But, we do post-mortem. We second guess ourselves all the time, and that's what makes us better. And any lawyer that says they've never made a mistake is lying. We've all made mistakes, but as long as it's a mistake of judgment, and I've learned that over time, if you consider the right path and consider the advice, and if you tell your client why you're advising something, you're much better off than just saying, "Do that. Don't let them see the kids. Let them see the kids. Give her more money. Don't give her more money." As long as you say, here's why. Here's why I think you should allow him to have extra time with the children, because he will appreciate it and reciprocate, or because it's good for your children, or because if you don't, the judge is going to think that you are really a control freak and is going to make sure that they grant him or her more money, time, whatever. So if you explain your reasoning, I sleep better at night. People make stupid decisions all the time. And I can't get mad at them. What I can get mad at them for is if they make a stupid decision and I've explained it to them and they still make a stupid decision, then I can get upset, but it's their call, right? They're paying me money to give them advice. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I didn't tell them their options or didn't tell them why I think this is the path they should take, or why they should not file for divorce today, why they should try to work things out behind the scenes, because we represent a lot of high profile people. And as soon as you file something, it gets picked up and it gets public, and all of a sudden it's a whole nother ballgame. Explaining why it might be good to file because you get to be in court and have a judge come help you and you need some help, or why it might be good not to file because you can try your best to work with them and maybe they'll appreciate that you didn't file. You know, there are a whole bunch of moving parts, but I sleep pretty well at night. I get upset sometimes when judges make bad decisions, when clients make bad decisions, when other lawyers make bad decisions, and when other clients make bad decisions. A judge I know, an old judge, gave me an idea once, and I've never been able to get rid of it, and I like it. It takes 4 or 5 people to create a settlement, a resolution, and it just creates one to mess it up. You know, you could have 2 lawyers, 2 clients, maybe a mediator, maybe a spouse, a new spouse, a friend, a parent. Anybody can mess up a deal. But if they all get together and they all work it out, great.
Now, when you have clients that accidentally or intentionally or either or leak information that is rather confidential and it creates a splash, as I'm assuming that can happen when you have high profile clients or just non-profile, high profile. How does that, how do you manage that?
So there are a whole bunch of directions this conversation can go, you know, when things get leaked. First of all, it's their life, you know, and if they want to talk, first of all, what I tell my client, I can't tell other people without their permission. They can. It's their privilege. So it's not my privilege, it's the client's privilege. If I say, here's what's going to happen, here's what I think, here's what I advise, they can tell anybody they want. And sometimes they should. They should go tell their parents, their closest advisor, and say, my lawyer says, here's what I should do and why. They can talk to whoever they want. But when you're talking about, and what I think you're talking about is a high profile case where somebody wants to let the world know that their spouse cheated or was abusive. And, you know, that's just telling their story. That, you know, and I'm not a celebrity, right? I don't know how their world works. I sort of glimpse inside of it. But sometimes their personal reputation is more valuable than whatever the money transaction is in the divorce. So sometimes they have to have their narrative. I represented a PR person once who had a saying, which was, if you don't be telling your story, somebody else is going to be explaining it, you know, right? So sometimes that's the question. You got to, if the whole world's talking about you and you're a celebrity, maybe it is better just to get out there and say, I want you to hear it from me. And here's my story. And it comes from my lips and my mouth, and it's more authentic. So it's not my job to advise. They have PR people. My job is to think about how is the court going to consider what they've done. And I try to tell them, if you go out and talk bad about your spouse, the judge is probably not going to find that a favorable fact.
Right.
But again, that's for PR people. And again, we don't leak things. We don't call, you know, news organizations and say, hey, we need to know. And if someone asks us to do that, we don't do that. We can do things to prevent it. We can try to file in different cities or different counties. We can try not to file something and work it out. And then, like Jeff Bezos, right? You heard about his divorce after he was divorced. They worked everything out, negotiated it. I'm sure it was not a one-night negotiation. And then when they figured it out and they signed everything, then they told the world we're getting divorced. That's the ideal to me. You know, the people that can figure out how to solve it themselves, then have us put it together, tie it up with a bow, file it, and it's done. And everything is kept private. So
now that we're speaking about clients and sort of like that process, you know, a client comes to you and say, hey, I want to get a divorce. I have a lot of assets. I don't want, you know, I want it to be amicable, but I don't want to end up losing everything. Can you just talk about like your normal process?
It's every day. It's every day. And the problem, so I wish, you know, one of my dreams would be that people would come in to see me and say, me and my spouse, we both at the same moment decided we want a divorce. And we're both on the same page. You know, that would be wonderful. It's not a great thing to want a divorce, but at least the hard part for me is that somebody wants it sooner than or more than the other side. And that's what creates the friction. If it was a business transaction, if you knew you needed a car and you had a budget of $10,000, then you'd come into my car dealership and we'd figure out what can you afford, and it would be done. But instead, you come in and you want a car, and the person you're buying it from, your spouse, doesn't want to sell. They want to keep the relationship going. They don't want to be at a car dealership. They don't want to be in the process of divorce. And that's hard. So then how do I advise you? What do you do? You know, and we talk about how many assets you have and how complicated it is. And maybe I say, if you go to court, this is what will happen. But if you really want it over, you might have to give her or him more money. And then you say to me, why? That's not fair. And I say, because she doesn't want a divorce and she's going to drag this out. And so you might have to give her more than you should, you know? Those are hard conversations. And so it's what I like, because you try to figure out what's important to somebody. Really, what is important? Sometimes it's, I just want to decide where my daughter goes to college because college education was the most important thing in my life. Or I want to stay in this house because my parents raised me in this house and I want to make sure that I get to decide what happens with this house. That's more important than the beach house or the 401k. And so listening is a big part of what we do. There's a Chinese proverb, you learn more when you're listening than when you're talking. I don't know if it's a Chinese proverb, but I heard it was.
Hey, it sounds good.
Yeah.
So are you saying that it might be a little helpful maybe before people get married or right when they get married and they maybe want like a prenuptial agreement? Does that kind of help make the divorce process a little easier?
So that's a whole other discussion, a prenuptial agreement.
Okay.
And that's fine, we can talk about it. Certainly you should talk to your spouse or your fiance about what your goals and ambitions are. Talking about a prenup, to me, it's a great thing. Because whether you sign a prenup or not, it at least lets you see what the other side is thinking and what their insecurities are. You know, if someone grew up poor and said, you know what, I grew up poor and I can be poor again. I'm not marrying you for your money. I don't need a prenup. Or I grew up poor and I never want to be poor again. So if I marry you, I want to make sure that if we get divorced, I'm secure. You know, you start to learn about people, and when you learn about how they feel about money, and again, money's the only thing that's relevant in a prenup. You can't decide who's going to be the custodial parent, because by the time you have kids, you might be a drug addict or they might be a drug addict. You can't decide ahead of time what's good for kids, but you can decide what to do with the money. I think it's a great idea to think about and to have. You know, you save a lot of money. I mean, the cost for me to represent somebody in a divorce without a prenup is usually 10 times what it would be with a prenup. Because you go and think about it, if you're a judge and two people come before you and they say, Judge, we signed this prenuptial agreement that says what should happen if we get divorced. But now we want you to figure it out. If you're the judge, you know what you're thinking? You guys are grown-ups, you had lawyers, you're doing what you agreed to.
Right.
Next case. And so that's usually what happens. So prenuptial agreements are good to discuss. And sometimes you have people that talk about a prenuptial agreement and realize they're not suited. They're not meant to be together because somebody thinks they're entitled to all this money and the other side thinks they're not, or she's not, or he's not. But what it really does is it avoids complicated, ugly, expensive divorces and divorce lawyers and divorce judges. So it's a conversation worth having, you know. But I could tell you all day long the reasons not to have them. You know, there are romantic reasons. Somebody's parents might have had an ugly fight about the prenuptial agreement and that caused them to have a hard marriage. Each case is unique, but certainly you should ask the questions. You know, what do you think about a prenuptial agreement? And just see how your fiance responds and then take it from there.
Now, does potential income and current income play a huge factor in divorce cases?
Well, yeah, the problem with the prenup is that you don't know what's going to happen. You know, there's some famous cases where somebody was rich and they signed a prenup making sure the other side didn't get any of their money, and vice versa, I don't get any of their money. And then the other person became wealthy. And the person that was famous, you know, a ball player who only plays for a few years and then blows all their money, sometimes it switches. So it's very hard to predict the future. Most often prenuptial agreements are more about family money or money that you've earned if you get married later in life and you've accumulated some wealth. It's more often to protect that. And then what happens during the marriage is usually up in the air. But we've had agreements that say, look, I'm a professional athlete. Anything I ever earned from playing in the NFL stays mine, because it's not just that I'm playing during the marriage, but I practiced when I was in 8th grade and I played hard when I was in college. And after we're married and after we're divorced, it's my body that's going to suffer, and it's my knees that are going to be shaky, and it's my head injuries that are going to come back to haunt me. So if I make money from the NFL, I keep that, and you get X or you get 10% or whatever. So, but again, as many options as you can think of, and I bet your head's spinning right now, Jordan. You know, you can think of so many different ways to decide how to divide income or assets or inheritances. It's just thinking ahead of time so that if you get divorced, it's already done. It's already pre-decided. So if you want a divorce, you get divorced and you get remarried. You don't have to fight about money for years and years and years.
So you mentioned like ball players, and we always see, they make significantly more money than the person that they're with. And it just seems a little unfair that, some people might, have to give up 200-300K a month, and it seemed like you could be okay with, 5-10K. How does that happen? And when I say this, I know, but just for the general audience,
it's I could argue it 100 different ways, right? There are a whole bunch of different sides to it. If you're an athlete, you're not just someone who won the lottery. A lot of people think he's playing a game, she's playing a game, they're making $1 million for doing something they love. How lucky are they? Everybody wants to be in the NFL. Everybody wants to be in the NBA. Every young kid, that's their dream, right? A lot of young kids. It takes a lot more than just being talented. First, you have to be gifted, tall, coordinated, athletic. You have to have work ethic. You have to work your behind off. You have to ignore going out to drink and being out with your friends and stay home and shoot baskets every night and every day and every morning. And you have to get lucky. And you can't be in a car wreck that causes you an injury that means you can't play. And you have to get seen by somebody who might be able to get you into a good college that can prep you, or a good prep school. So there's a lot of things that have to come together. Becoming an NBA or NFL or baseball player is not a lucky, manna from heaven just dropping into your lap. It's a lot of work. So people that do that's their income, they very rarely feel like, oh, I just got lucky and I'm getting this money, so I'll share it. They worked really hard for it. The other thing, they're not going to make $1 million a year for 20 or 30 or 40 years. They're going to make their money for a few years. And it's really hard for a 17-year-old kid or a 20-year-old kid to realize, I'm going to make $5 or $10 or $15 million, which sounds like more money than God has. But that money has to last them their whole life, because at age 23, they're a has-been, and now they're used to the lifestyle, the big cars, the fancy houses. But that income is sitting in the bank at $15 million or whatever it is, and they're generating $600,000, $800,000 a year from it. That's a good income. But if you spend more than $600,000 or $800,000 a year, that $15 million goes down to zero by the time they're 30 or 35. And then what can they do to go make that kind of money again? It's very hard. So protecting the money they earn when they only are going to earn it for a few years is very difficult. And I respect a lot of those people. They have to mature fast. I don't know about you. I didn't think about a retirement plan when I was 25 years old. I didn't think about life insurance until I had kids. So these folks have to figure out what to do with their money at age 20, while most people are thinking, all right, I'm 40 years old, I'm starting to think about what happens one day when I retire, or disability insurance. They got to figure it out fast. And that's sort of one of the things I enjoy about doing what I do, is seeing these people grow up fast and understand and figure out life at a very young age.
But how is it that even when the spouses separate, that one spouse might seem to get a ridiculous amount of money even though they're not together, and it would seem like this is way more?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
It's a good question. So there are not laws on the books that say here's how a divorce for an NBA athlete should happen. Right? When the legislature is passing laws on divorce and family law, they come up with general law for the most of the population. And generally, in most states, it's some version of whatever was earned during the marriage by either side is in the pot, the marital pot, the proverbial marital pot that we divide. And I'm sure we all would agree, whatever's in the pot should be divided evenly in most cases. If he could work and make a lot of money and she stayed home with the children, well, whatever they have, they should divide. Or she worked really hard because she had a unique skill and he stayed home with the kids. They didn't plan on getting divorced. They were going to live off of what she earned. Now they're getting a divorce, so we should divide it evenly. So the presumption in most states is, let's start with a 50-50 presumption. So then you say someone gets married to an NFL athlete who makes, and I've had a jury trial on this issue, made $5 million during the 3-year marriage. Well, they earned $5 million during the marriage. Why don't they split it 50-50? It's different than the average person. The law is there for the average person, but in that case, that person that earned $5 million is not going to earn $5 million in the next 5 years because they broke their leg and they're not able to play again and the NFL moves on. So maybe in that case, they should share a small portion of it. Or maybe you should figure out that $5 million is the same as a normal person in a regular job would earn over 20 years. but they weren't married for 20 years. They were only married for the first few years. So what would a normal person have earned in the first few years? There are a lot of complicated ways to look at it. The hard part is that nobody in the state legislature, the people that make the laws, is going to take the time to say, let's create a special law to decide how do we divide money for NFL athletes, right? So we're stuck with these laws that are general. Same thing with criminal law. You know, why'd that guy go to jail for life when he was just selling marijuana? Well, there are laws that say when you commit your fourth crime that the sentence goes to a certain, you know, it's hard to figure out the right justice for every single situation. So I'm a big fan of laws that give the judges discretion and gives me stuff to argue. Judge, in most cases, it should be 50-50. In this case, he doesn't have a backup plan. He doesn't have a plan B. He put all his eggs in the basket of being an athlete, and then he had this horrible injury. He had 14 concussions. He can't play again. He can't get a job right now. The money he made is going to have to last him. She's got a college degree. She can go back to work. Give her a little bit to get her a head start, but don't give her half of what he has because he needs it and she doesn't. I mean, or whatever the argument may be.
Now, in talking about assets and what someone can walk away with, is it seen as maybe scrupulous or kind of not in good faith if you're like, you know what, I'm just going to give $100 million away to my mom and stash it? You know, we hear a lot of those cases where... Yeah,
asset protection you're talking about. People come in and ask me, how do I shield assets for my spouse? And I say, that's not my area. I don't know that you can even do that legally. That's more estate planning.
Got it.
But the real question comes down to, what were your intentions? And if someone comes in and says, I'm going to get a divorce, I'm going to give this money to my brother, I tell them that's the worst thing they can do. Because, you know, the judge is going to see right through it. The judge is going to make you give half of it to her, and your brother may not give it back to you, right? Right, you think, it's just, but people think like that. On the other hand, you know, if you want to give money to a disabled relative or put money away for your children and lock it away so that their kids and their grandkids, you know, you grew up poor and all of a sudden you hit it big and you make it in the NBA or the NFL, and you say, I'm going to have this money, I don't need it all. I want to make sure my kids and their kids have a chance at a good education, and that's legitimate, you know, especially if those kids are with your spouse that you're divorcing. Your spouse should say,
right,
thank you very much, I don't need it either. So there are a lot of ways to look at that. But I think giving money to a spouse, or I mean, to a friend or relative, to avoid giving it to your spouse, almost always backfires.
Just a few more questions before we finish. I try not to make, you know, my questions compound.
Ask me whatever you want. I like this.
So, is it hard to manage a personal life and a legal life at the same time?
For me?
Yes.
So it's an interesting question, you know, and I get asked this a lot. I was head of a lot of bar associations, right? The family law sections of the American Bar and a couple others. To me, and maybe I'm unique, maybe I'm a weirdo, my personal life is the law. And that sounds really weird, but you know, I've grown up, I was chair of the family law sections of the Georgia Bar and the Atlanta Bar and the American Bar, and I travel, and we're in the International Academy of Family Lawyers. So, and I got married late in life and had a young child late in life who, you know, I had a bit more money than most kids that most people that have an infant. I was already 40 years old. So we traveled, and we'd go for bar meetings, and we'd go to bar association meetings. I got back from one last week in Montreal and 2 weeks ago in Albuquerque. So my social life, my private life really is with lawyers, and it's meeting lawyers, and it's speaking on legal topics, or sitting in seminars and learning about legal topics, or going to dinner and lunches and breakfast with legal topics. So maybe I'm not the right person to answer the question, can you have a personal life and a legal life? I've been lucky. I think I'm lucky that I can get to go to fun places like Montreal, to practice my craft, to hone my craft, and to still go out and take a walk and see the historic places. So my social life is my legal life, which is my private life. And for good or bad, I don't have to go to my job and say, okay, that's my job, and now I want to do something way the opposite to go fill my soul and feed my soul and do stuff that's, you know, it's together. And lawyers are generally doing good things. We're working on Habitat for Humanity houses as social work projects at our seminars, or we're doing pro bono work and helping people that can't afford us. So I'm getting to do a lot of stuff that a lot of people can't do in the context of their job. And a lot of people have to work in the office every day in Atlanta, and then if they want a vacation, they want to go to the beach, they have to take time off, and they have to go to the beach and be with their family. You know, we have seminars at the beach. So my vacations are legal seminars. That's when I plan my vacations. I don't do a separate vacation. I almost always plan my vacations around a sports and entertainment seminar that's in Vegas, and I get to be in Vegas and go to some good meals and meet some friends. So that may be a weird answer.
No, it's perfect.
But it's who I am. I just I think it's helped my business. It's helped me become a better lawyer. When I see lawyers in other states telling me war stories of what happened there, it registers. And then I realize I've got the same situation here. I learned my lesson vicariously through her lawyer who complained that they didn't tell their client to show up 30 minutes ahead of time. And their client showed up late to court, and the judge kicked him out of court. And now I remember I always tell my clients to go early, or whatever it is that I might learn by chance.
Is it odd going into a marriage being a divorce lawyer?
So that's interesting. I joke with people that I skipped my first marriage. I just didn't get married until I was 40. But no, I mean, I make my own mistakes, and my marriage has its ups and downs. But I do see cases that make me realize, God, and I thought my wife was really doing something that I didn't like, and I see this person and I say, wow, my wife really is great compared to all these other people. And I see clients, I see men that say terrible things to their spouses, and sometimes I go home and I say things and I'm like, I sound just like my client. Stop doing that, Randy. Don't. So it helps, but no, it's just it's a job, and I do my job, and I think my wife learns a lot too, because she's with me at these seminars and she's around lawyers and she learns a lot about what we go through. So the good news is I see how much trouble other people have, and I realize the troubles that I don't have.
Now, do clients or opposing parties ever get mad or maybe want to come after you because they didn't get a favorable judgment and your client did?
So it's not usually the lawyer's fault, right?
Right.
I mean, but we take the fall for a lot of people. A lot of times a woman or a man will say, I don't really want him to have a lot of time, but I'm afraid to tell him that. So I tell him, and I say to the judge, our position is that he or she should only visit Friday to Sunday. I might tell my client, I think that's wrong, you should offer more time, but that's their life, and sometimes they hide behind us. So people get mad at lawyers, but good lawyers, and judges who were judges that now serve as mediators see this, good lawyers, before they go to court, do everything they can to get their client to settle. I will tell my client, you can get the same result by settlement instead of going to court, or you can get close to the same result, or even if you get a little bit less, you save the aggravation and the cost. I clear my soul, I clear my conscience by doing that, and when I go to court, I know I've done everything I can to get my client to compromise or to make a reasonable offer. And sometimes the other side is the problem. They don't take the reasonable offer and they don't make a reasonable offer, so we go to court. But do clients or the other side get mad at us? Sometimes, because they think that, if we didn't play our role, they would have gotten more money. But I'd like to think, and maybe I've evolved and maybe it's more as I get older, that I'd like to feel like if I ran into somebody whose spouse I represented, and maybe I'm just dreaming, but I'd like to think that they would look at me and say, Mr. Kessler, I hated you because you represented my wife, but I realized you had a job to do, and you were respectful to me when you were in court. And you were respectful to me, and in fact, I think you probably tried to get her or him to be a little more generous than they wanted to be. And I appreciate that. I hope they would feel like that, because I'm representing my client, but it's not my life. My job is not to go in there and ruin the other person's life and make sure that they're miserable and poor and don't see their kids. My job is to let them all come out of it so that they move on in their life, and that they can move past it and not be resentful because she said something in court that he can never unhear, and vice versa. Settling a case has a lot of fringe benefits. You never see your spouse get on the witness stand and point the finger at you and say you're a terrible person. That's worth something to me.
Now, are there ever any jurisdictional issues that can make divorce law?
Yeah, jurisdiction's a fancy word for which state are you going to be in or which court are you going to be in. And that comes up all the time, especially with athletes, and I don't want to keep going back to athletes, but they play ball in different states and they might get traded to a different state, and so they started their marriage in Georgia and they get traded to the Portland Trailblazers, so now their divorce might be in Oregon, or they might get, usually there are good rules about where it's going to be. It's usually where everybody lives, but sometimes they start a family in one state, then they move to another state while their family stays in this state, and sometimes it does make a difference. Child support is much higher in states like California or jurisdictions like Los Angeles and New York City and Chicago than they are in Georgia or Memphis, Tennessee. So sometimes people come to me and say, I may be moving to Georgia, I may be moving to California, is there a better jurisdiction? And we have to tell them honestly. I say, I don't know all the laws in every state, but I think Georgia's better or worse than this state, but go talk to a lawyer in that state too, or let me talk to a lawyer and we compare notes. That happens a lot, where we figure out which state is better and should we file in one state or the other. There are some reasons to file in one state. Some states have a 1-year waiting period to get a divorce in. North Carolina, for example. So if you want a quick divorce, you're better off living in Georgia and getting a divorce than you are in North Carolina. So there are some jurisdictional issues, and I've been lucky because I've been very active in the American Bar and other national groups that I learn about some of the nuances in other states, and I'm always learning. There are some differences. Georgia, for instance, allows a jury trial on money issues in a divorce. No other state really does that. So, if you got a case where the other side's really a terrible person, most judges have seen a lot of terrible people, right? They've seen murderers, but a jury might give you more sympathy for being married to somebody who's terrible than a judge. That's an advantage we have in Georgia that some states don't have.
I would think having a jury trial for a divorce matter would be very difficult because you're asking 9, 10, or 12. I can't remember. Yeah, 12.
So you can agree to less than 12. I did one with 6. It's
6?
I did one because we agreed on almost everything, so we just let 6 people do it.
Oh, okay.
But it's usually 12 people. But there's some reasons for it. Number one, you might have a radical judge who just got burned, him or herself, on alimony and doesn't like the concept of alimony. Or you could have a judge that you have a temporary hearing, and on the temporary hearing they say, Mr. Kessler, your client needs to go to work. He or she shouldn't be getting so much money from their spouse. We say, thank you very much, we'll have a jury. The good thing about a jury is that you have 12 people, so you have 12 shots at it, sort of 12 bites at the apple. If you have a judge, if you don't ring a bell with that judge and make that judge convinced that your client's right, you lose. You go before a jury, there are 12 people that you're arguing to, and juries take things seriously. And I've had this discussion with people on our Supreme Court of Georgia, with lawyers, and most judges, when they sit through a jury trial, they realize juries usually get it right. Because if you think about it, Jordan, sometimes there's a crazy person on the jury that says she should get everything, and there's another crazy person that says she should get nothing. They cancel each other out, and the moderates take hold, and eventually they start saying, okay, $1 million, 0. All right, 800,000, 200,000, and they meet in the middle. So you get a more realistic, moderate result, in my experience, from a jury. I love it so much. I teach a class on it at Emory Law School on how to try a jury trial. And the best thing about teaching is I learn. I always see a student do something that I say, that's clever. You were very, very believable, or that was well thought out. So it's also one of the most challenging things a lawyer does, because judges know the law generally. So I don't have to say, Judge, you know how much child support there should be. With a jury, we have to teach them, here's what the law says, here are the child support guidelines, here are the reasons you can deviate from those numbers, here's the things you have to take into account. The child's got a significant learning disability, or there's a travel cost for my client to come visit, and the law allows that, and OCGA, the Official Code of Georgia Annotated, says that there's a lot more explaining to do with the jury. It's more comfortable with the judge because judges have been there. But it's also exhilarating to prepare for it and to finish it and to leave it in the hands of 12 people and to know that you did all you can do, and now it's up to 12 strangers to make a good decision.
And speaking of jury trials, I really like the voir dire, the jury selection process, because it's
the most important part of the case.
Yeah, it seems like the lawyer, and I was talking about this with another attorney, is that understanding the cultural nuances, to a case versus someone.
What is when you pick who's going to be on the jury, and it's a misnomer. You don't pick a jury, you strike a jury. So you're given 36, 48 candidates, and between the two lawyers, you have to get rid of everybody except 12. So you're not picking who you want on the jury, you're picking who you don't want on the jury, which should be easier because all you have to do is find out who's likely not to like your client, And if you could be easy, and if I represent a black person, I can say, are you a racist? And they say yes, I get rid of them. But it's not that easy, right? Because you got to be careful and you got to be private. And I think a lot of lawyers are sometimes too worried about offending, and they don't ask the right questions. Like I've seen lawyers that will never say, have you been through a divorce? Well, how do you know how you feel about divorce unless you've been through it? If you say yes as a potential juror member, I might say, tell me how you felt about it. Well, I didn't want the divorce. My wife went out and met somebody else and wanted to marry him. And then I think, well, that's sort of like my client in the divorce. So you're going to hate my client because she reminds you of your ex-wife. Thank you very much. And I know to strike you from the jury. It's a very interesting process, and you really have to be able to talk to people and get stuff out of them. You have to ask them, to be brutally honest and to tell you how they might feel if the facts of this case involve somebody who had a problem with marijuana. Would that make you more likely to be sympathetic towards them or less likely? And you might say, well, I don't want to admit anything, but I can understand why somebody might smoke pot, I think, okay, I'm not going to strike him. But I have to be careful because now by asking that question, the other side will realize that guy's going to like my client, so maybe they strike him or her.
That's what I was thinking about, is that do you allow someone to be let me say this. Is it sometimes where you don't strike a juror or potential juror because you don't want the other side to know that person could hurt your case?
Sometimes. So there's an order of striking. Usually I strike one and tell them who's gone, then they strike one. So there might be somebody I really don't like, but I might save them for the end, hoping that the other side gets rid of them first. It's an interesting game. The problem is you never really know what's deep down inside. I talked to a juror after a trial years ago, a jury trial, and my case was about a guy who had 4 daughters, and raised them and got divorced and then married a new woman and didn't have kids with them. And after the trial, the 4th of the jury, I walked her back to her car because it was at night and I wanted her to be safe. And she shared with me, she goes, Mr. Kessler, I identified with your client's oldest daughter. I said, what? She goes, when I was growing up, my daddy divorced and his new wife tried to take all of our money. I didn't know that because I didn't ask enough probing questions, but you never know what's going to drive somebody. So voir dire is interesting and it's underutilized, and lawyers don't spend enough time trying to figure out who the right jurors will be. But it's by far the most important part of the case. You get to choose who's making the decision. You can argue all day long, but you got crazy friends and you got normal friends, right?
Right.
Which one do you want deciding your life? There's some you don't want,
yeah,
and there's some you do want. You got to figure out which ones are the ones you want.
So my moot court my mock trial was about Batson challenges.
Sure.
And
which is, can you strike everybody just on the basis of race? That's illegal in Georgia in most states.
And I just found that to be very interesting because on the surface I was like, oh, this is pretty easy. And then as we go through the 14th Amendment and all these different...
But what happens if the 4 black people you want to strike are all people that are really rich and you don't want them on the jury because your client isn't in their ballpark, and your client, they're gonna make my client pay a lot of money because they're used to spending $8,000 a month on a mortgage and having 2 nice cars, and my client doesn't want his or her ex to get that much money. Well, those people, they're not gonna think that much about, make them pay $8,000 or $10,000 a month because they can afford it. So I don't want them on, but they happen to be black. Well, you got to be really careful in those situations to make sure that you can prove that that's not why you struck them. Just because my client is a white woman married to a black man isn't why I got rid of them. I got rid of them because they were going to have no hard time making my client pay all this money. So it's interesting. And again, the law can only do these general ideas, and Batson's one of those cases. It can only generally say that you can't discriminate based on race. But it can't get into the details, and it can't get into my mind and know why I struck somebody from a jury. And so it's a good law because it makes me be more careful and more sensitive to it, but it's not perfect.
It would seem like now we're kind of hitting on the implicit bias aspect of the law, and sometimes, I'll talk with family members or friends, and they'll say, well, it should have been this way. And I was like, the thing that you have to consider is that you don't know how that judge feels. You don't know how that prosecutor feels. Is that kind of one of the more challenging things that you've had to?
It's why everybody should settle their own case. You should not leave it up to a stranger. A judge is a stranger. And a judge, in most divorce cases and family law cases, are decided by a judge without a jury. A judge in Georgia typically gets assigned 800, 900, or 1,000 cases a year to resolve between their criminal docket and their civil docket and their business cases. There are only 365 days in a year, and that doesn't count weekends. they got to get rid of all those cases. So you know what happens when you're in front of a judge and arguing your case? You know what the judge is thinking? Move it along. I got 15 more cases to get through this week. And it's not their fault that they have so many cases. The public doesn't say, well, let's give a lot more money to the judicial system and create a lot more judges. They don't do that. So, you know, it's hard to understand why judges rule in a certain way, but they're going to do it simply. You know, if there's $1 million, you better give me a good reason why I'm not cutting it in half, because I got other people that don't have that much money and they need my help more than you. Your client, if she gets $500,000 or $600,000 or $400,000, she's going to be just fine, Mr. Kessler. Move it along. And I want to say, but Judge, she didn't want this divorce. She didn't ask for her husband to cheat. She didn't ask for her husband to push her against a wall. She had to get a divorce. And now she's going to walk away with $500,000, which is a lot of money, but she doesn't have the income he does. And that money's going to run out. How is it fair that he gets to keep $500,000 and his big income?
How do you like determine that? How do you make that statement? $500,000 is going to run out.
You get used to it, and we call it the straight face test. As long as it's an argument I can make with a straight face, I can make that argument with a straight face. He's going to have a big income, so Judge, let her have that $500,000. Let her keep it in the bank and earn interest on it. And he makes $200,000 a year. He can get by on $150,000 a year. Make him give her $50,000 a year of that, right?
$50,000 a year.
$50,000 a year. He's working hard for his $200,000. He's going to think he should keep it, but you know what? He built his career during the marriage, and he shouldn't have cheated on her, and they should still be married. So he's still going to get to keep $150,000. Let her have a little bit of it, at least for a few years, Judge, until she finds a job, goes back to school, gets retrained, whatever it is.
What if both spouses cheat on each other? Does that
So in most states, cheating may not matter. In Georgia, it's supposed to matter, but what judges say is, you get to go be with somebody else. You don't have to worry about him anymore. They don't really give it a lot of weight. But it's supposed to matter. It's supposed to be a bar to alimony. It's supposed to matter as to how much money, how you're dividing property in Georgia. But it probably doesn't matter as much to a judge as the person who has been cheated on would like.
Last question. What was your first case? And do you
my first case, I had a bunch of first cases. I mean, one of my first cases was a woman who I caught a call from last week, and it's been 30 years and we're still friends. She came to me, 3 lawyers told her she would never get alimony. And I said, I'm a young lawyer, I'll go to court. You seem like you should have some alimony because he's got a good income and you don't have an income. And we got her 3 years of alimony and she was grateful as could be. And we had a jury trial on that. You know, I've had a bunch of, but when I started, I did everything. I had traffic court cases, I had, DUI folks, I had a personal injury case or two. And I just loved helping people and figuring it out. And it was like a puzzle. And, one way or another, you finish a puzzle sooner or later and you move on. But those people that I helped in family law cases when I started, those are the ones I still remember and that still remember me. And I still run into them. And I get the calls every now and then, I just want to check in on you. Like, you want to check in on me? You went through the divorce. Like, yeah, but it's been a while. I remember you were there with me when, right? Going through a divorce is a hard thing. When you share that with somebody and you're there in a role to help, it's nice. It's a bonding moment. And it's nice to see people that are flourishing and some aren't flourishing, but you see them down the road and hopefully, if I did my job well, they're in a better place or I help them get on to the next chapter. And that's my goal. And I don't always do it and it doesn't always come out good for them and some of them still suffer. But I got to sleep at night. And I sleep at night pretty well if I know that I thought about it and took it seriously as if it was my own case or my own family member going through it.
This has been an excellent interview, and I think that this interview really will hit home at the fact that lawyers do care, and it seems like you exercise a huge
Good lawyers do care. You don't get a good reputation by being a crappy lawyer. You don't get a good reputation by saying, just pay me the money and then I'll tell you I'm working, I'm not really working, right? You get a good reputation by being responsive. When you call me at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning and wake me up and I answer the phone because I know you're devastated, that's why you remember me, not because I said, I'll call you in a week when I have time.
Now, what happens when people run out of money?
That's hard. That's really hard. So for a divorce lawyer, when people run out of money, you got 2 choices. You can try to get out of the case or you can stick with it. And it really depends. And I'll tell you my little secret that a lot of us have, which is you don't take the cases when they're going to run out of money. Just because someone can afford the $10,000 initial fee doesn't mean that if it becomes a $30,000 or $40,000 case, they're going to be able to pay you. And so you be honest. And when I'm first meeting with you, I say, look, what if your spouse fights and brings up everything and it ends up going on and on and on? Are you going to be able to afford us? And you can be honest and say, I may not be able to, but I like you. And I say, well, then I'm getting into the case knowing that you may not be able to pay, and I may have to try to ask the other side to pay my fee. Or I say, it's not fair to my other clients that can afford to pay me and I want to represent them, and I don't take the case. But if I've been in a case a long time and it's the other side's fault, most often we'll stay in the case and we'll collect over time. But we try not to do that too often because we get a lot of overhead. Our rent is enormous. I mean, I've got the lawyers that work with me and for me, they're getting paid. Whether the client pays the firm or not, I've got a duty to make sure the lawyers that are doing their job get paid. So it's a balance. How do you try your best to make sure that the clients that hire you can afford to pay you. And if they can't, and you still want to represent them, I can't take too many of those. There are thousands of people that could use my services. I know that. And I could do free work for all those people all day long and be filled up morning, noon, and night. I can't afford to do that. But the more cases I take that can pay me, then on the other side, the more cases like that we can handle for the people that can't afford it. So it's a tough balance when clients run out of money. Unfortunately, in divorce, or fortunately, it's marital money, right? So it's not like the husband is going to bleed the wife dry and make her pay all her money to lawyers, because the money is going to be paid by the marital estate. If there's $100,000 that they've saved, you know what? If she owes me $50,000, it's coming out of that money. So they're going to have $50,000 to divide when it's all over. So it's in everybody's best interest not to make it go to court, not to make it expensive.
So if a client can't pay and it's ongoing, is there ever a situation where you're like, look, I'm going to have to withdraw, and you're going to be...
Yeah, we withdraw from a lot of cases. We're more likely to withdraw when a client can't afford to pay us and chooses not to than if a client's done everything they can. And if a client's paid us $5,000 and owes us $20,000, we're out. But if a client's paid us $20,000 and owes us $5,000, we're going to probably stay in if we're close to the end and get it to the finish line. So everything is case by case.
Now, this might be an off-camera question.
All right.
But when it comes to collecting...
I don't mind talking on camera.
No.
When it comes to collecting, look, would you want a lawyer that can't collect what's due him or her? You want a lawyer that's going to be able to go to court and make your spouse do what the court orders them to do. I better be able to do it for myself. So we got to be pretty good at collecting. And it's a problem with lawyers. It's a real problem with divorce lawyers, because if you don't pay your car payment, your car's going to be repossessed, right? If you don't pay your mortgage, your house is going to be foreclosed. If you don't pay your divorce lawyer, well, that's my friend. He knows what I've gone through. I've talked to him about my wife cheating. I've talked to him about my substance abuse issues. So people feel insulated that a lawyer is not going to sue them. You got to set the boundaries. It's a friendship and it's a relationship, but it's a business relationship. And either you let it go and you say, I'm not going to sue you and I'm just going to do it forever, or you say, no, I've got to do it like a business, and so we have a business to run. And we're not afraid if we have to sue a client that chooses not to pay us and they have the money. If someone's just broke and they don't have the money and we just get out of the case, we hope they make the money sometimes, or sometimes we make the other side pay or ask the judge to make the other side pay. Hopefully those are few and far between, and there are cases like that. But the best way to not get stuck like that is to not accept a client who says, I'm borrowing $5,000 from my grandfather and that's all I have, and I want this to be a nasty, bloody, ugly jury trial, and I want you to do everything for me. And I say, well, then you need to find another lawyer. We're not your lawyers. Even though $5,000 is a lot of money. I could do a lot if someone paid me $5,000. It's a problem waiting to happen, because the $5,000 will run out, and then I'll be doing work for free. Or if I fire them as a client, then they already borrowed the only money they could get from their family member, and they've got to find a new lawyer, and they have no money for that lawyer. So maybe there's a younger lawyer, a lawyer that's just getting started, that could make that $5,000 go a lot farther, that doesn't have to spend the money on a fancy office like we've committed to. And hindsight's 20/20. If I had it to do over again, we wouldn't be in such an expensive office. But we're here, at least for the time being. Who knows where that's going to go. But that's the complicated answer to your question about what do we do about collections.
Yes. Well, it seems we could go on, and definitely want to be respectful of your time.
I appreciate it.
Hopefully, we might be able to get another interview out of you, because we have so many different questions I could ask.
But there are so many more interesting people in the world. When you run out of them, then put me in the back of the line. I'll be glad to come back.
No, we got to keep you in the front.
All right.
Keep you in the front. Randy, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I
All
really
right.
appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
You're great. And you're a great interviewer, too.
Thank you.
Laid
Thank
back,
you.
comfortable, easy to talk to.
Thank you.
So, good luck with this.